So I figured we'll spend about 15 minutes together and kind of send you off to work on this design concept. And the nice thing about it is you can't fail. There's literally no way to fail except lack of participation. And anything you come up with, whether it's really brave or really traditional, is useful. I want to show you one of the books that hold on, so I have it with me. So the book that I was referencing is this book. It's called The Language of School Design. Can you see that okay?
We can. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the book's a wonderful book, and I never want to ask anybody to go spend money if they don't know they're going to use it long term, but it's a lovely book, and the things that they don't really focus on 21st century, even though it says design patterns for 21st century schools. This is not about technology. It's just that in this day and age, we know so much about learning styles, brain science, the impact of the environment, learning, Howard Gardner, et cetera, that we ought to be reimagining schools anyway. And oh, by the way, technology can fit into these spaces. So they talk a lot about things like the difference between a watering hole and a cave space. The watering holes are areas where people gather, and then cave spaces are alcoves and niches where people need to hide away or be solo for more reflective work. Fielding and Nair have also done, in addition to the design patterns, which are wonderful, they've also started to design things called Einstein Studios, Buddha Studios, Jamie Oliver Studios, Da Vinci Studios. The idea is they've taken these big thinkers, and including Jamie Oliver, which seems quirky that he's this young British chef, and then you have the Buddha and Da Vinci, et cetera. But the idea is, instead of a classic science lab, how can you have messy spaces, a relationship to the outside, and they started to think, well, Einstein is the kind of guy that would really need to be reflective, but he was really kind of conceptually hands-on, and then we would need spaces that would allow that to take place. Da Vinci was about tinkering and invention, and again, you need lots of spaces, lots of, whatever, and Jamie Oliver was this idea that you need to be able to have smaller scale eating spaces, not massive cafeterias. And so I think you'll like them because they really work with metaphor really well. They work with story. They work with the natural expression of the human experience, and then try to create a school or learning or campus model as a reflection of what's true about humans, as opposed to the factory that tries to reorient human behavior around efficient learning. So I think you'll like that. Even if you can get just one copy out of the library, I think it'd be worthwhile. So here's the challenge, and I'm gonna ask you. You guys will decide if you're going to team up in twos or work as one big group or kind of divide it like a real studio where you come up with a premise and each of you kind of goes at it separately and come back together. I'll let you all decide the practical side of how you're going to work. But here's what I would like. I want to come back after your lunch and do a real quick check-in where you guys you share your initial concept, which should be, I would say, 3/4 words and maybe 1/4 design. Like, I think you ought to be storytellers right after lunch where you really try to figure out your elevator pitch, really try to figure out the vision and mission of your space design, and really try to figure out how to defend it through words, which is what that's our background as educators. Then a little bit of kind of bubble sketching, where it's just like circles and arrows and quick, just being stick figure-ish. And I'll give you some I'll play a little bit devil's advocate. And I certainly won't be like what an architecture professor is and really tear you apart. But I'll play a little devil's advocate of like, okay, if you assume this, then what's that mean? That kind of stuff. And really it's just to help you all flesh out, if we can't do everything, but we can do one thing well, what is that one thing we're going to defend? And then the second part in the afternoon, you guys are going to go back and really try to translate that into space. You're really, without worrying about budgets, worrying about fire code, worrying about, how the contractor is going to build the wall. You're just going to say, you know what, we're going to build our ideal treehouse or ideal whatever, and it's just not going to have the word, Taj Mahal next to it. It's going to be practical but lovely. And then at the end of the afternoon, I'll come back and sort of give you feedback and ask you questions about that. And then you with, Carl and Scott will decide whether or not you're going to let this evolve over a multi-week project, which we've explored the potential of. And then I'll come back over the next 2 weeks and really look at your details and the research you've done and that sort of thing. So here's the challenge. There are 3 major spaces that I think we can design together. And I'm comfortable if you design one. I'm comfortable if you take on all 3. One is the classroom, and I mean a traditional classroom where there's a teacher trying to get through a history lesson or a French or Spanish or whatever it is. But it's a fairly traditional classroom. The other is more of a media, like a lab/media technology lab, right? And the third is the library. I think these are the three most specific spaces that schools don't believe they can live without, and we need to use them regularly. And all of them can be given more life in 21st century terms, right? So I'm okay if you as a collective force say we're going to take on all three spaces, because there's overlaps. There's a Venn diagram. What you can do in one can, but there's fine-tuning as well. I'm okay if you pick one or each one of you takes a different one. Again, you guys will decide that. But what I'd like to know is, realistically, but without apology, what is a 21st century classroom? We still use that word classroom. How can it, and what I mean is, how is the space, what are the key words, the key phrases, the key mindset, and then what is the space that would, so if somebody walked in, they would go, something important is happening here based on those ideas. I can see how it's adaptable. So classroom and then media tech lab, and I'll let you, fuss around with those words. And then the last is library or multimedia center if you want to dress it up a little. So you guys are going to be the designers. I'm going to be the client. So I'm coming to you and saying, none of us know how to do this. Don't apologize. Be as creative as you can in an hour, 3 hours. But help me understand what's possible if we were to do one classroom or one lab or one part of our library. Or all three, if you want to take the big leap. So between now and after lunch, you guys have to come back to this meeting with your vision, your mission, your language, your elevator pitch. Here's what our terms are, here's our principles, here's what are absolutes. And we have a couple of just a bar napkin sketch of what we think that could mean. And then I'll be the client, and I'll just be devil's advocate and naive, and I'll ask you questions. And then the second part of the day, the later afternoon, is you'll have an hour or so to go, okay, if we have to translate that into space, roughly a box, or maybe it's an L shape, or maybe it's a box with another little box attached to it, and maybe there's a lab next to it. Well, I'll let you figure that out. You're going to then try to translate that into boxes and squares and circles and arrows and windows and whatever else comes to mind. And you may even want to come up with multiple configurations of tables and desks. Maybe at the end of the day, that's what's radical. It's creating a protocol for how the furniture can move to create multiple expression. So I want to make it as simple as possible so you can be as creative as possible. And this really is what I do with architects and planners. It's just, we use fancier words to do the exact same thing, because all of them have big egos and big portfolios and a lot of expertise. So we dive in a little further, but it's the same. What do we mean by classroom? What do we mean by lab? What do we mean by a library? What do we mean by X, Y, and Z? So I'm going to let you guys get to work. My daughter's now covered in, I'll let you see. She's now covered in Hut cereal, and she didn't use a spoon, so now she's been using her hands. So we keep it real here. We don't use fancy technology like spoons. So I'm going to wave goodbye, and I'm going to see you at, 12:30 your time, 1:30 my time?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, guys, it's been great. I appreciate you. There's been a lot of sitting, but I hope everybody talking has at least made time pass a little faster. And now I'm excited because you guys are the pros, and I get to be the naive client.
All right, we'll see you in a couple hours, and in the meantime, we'll develop a space where we can post what we're working on. And
yeah, that's right, because we have this, we have a virtual experience that we get to share too, and Berkeley and I are going to go play and take a bath and figure out how to keep her entertained with plastic and wood.
All right, thanks,
All right,
Berkeley.
guys.